Thank you, Brett.
General, will you make the deadline of June 30th to pull U.S. troops out of major cities inside Iraq?
Well, Brett, in fact, we've already met the deadline. We have already moved out of the cities. We've been slowly doing it over the last 8 months, and the final units have moved out of the cities over the last several weeks.
So there are more than 130,000 U.S. troops still on the ground in Iraq, and in recent days there has been a serious uptick in violence. At least 200 people killed in recent days in these spectacular attacks. What is happening with this recent uptick in violence, in your opinion?
Well, again, I would say that overall stability in Iraq remains good. What we've had some extremist elements trying to bring attention to themselves, as well as divert attention from the progress being made in Iraq. And so we've seen a couple high-profile attacks aimed at innocent civilians. I think what this has done, frankly, has brought the air of Iraqi citizens against these groups, and I think it'll harden them in supporting them. And frankly, I believe it'll make it much more difficult for them to continue to operate inside of Iraq over the long term.
General, in April you said that this deadline might have to shift based on what you were seeing on the ground. What changed for you to be able to get to this point?
Yeah, well, Brett, in May we had the lowest level of incidents we've ever had on record in Iraq. In the first 3 weeks of June we did as well. You've seen a slight uptick this past week with these high-profile attacks. But again, I would say these are just extremist elements that are attempting to bring attention to themselves. And I think this is the right time for us to turn responsibility over to the Iraqis.
Understanding that this is part of the agreement that the U.S. signed with Iraq, are the Iraqis ready? How confident are you that they can handle the task of providing security to these cities?
Yeah, I'm fairly confident, Brett. Obviously, we've been working in close partnership with them for a very long time. We've seen constant improvement in the Iraqi security forces over the last 2 years. We've also seen improvement in local governance, in provincial governance. We've seen some improvement in the federal government. We've also seen the resilience of the citizens and the fact that they want the Iraqi security forces to take over security. And I think all of these factors, combined with the continued improvement in overall stability and security, makes this the right time for us to turn this over to the Iraqi security forces.
General, Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki calls this a great victory for the Iraqis. He describes it as a repulsion of the foreign occupiers, and he compares it to the rebellion against British troops in 1920. Now, understanding he's playing to an Iraqi audience here ahead of an election in January, the U.S. has spent hundreds of billions of dollars in Iraq. We've lost more than 4,300 men and women there. Do you find this terminology acceptable?
Brett, frankly, that's not exactly how I read it. I believe this is a celebration, and what we've seen the last few days is they're talking about this as a celebration of Iraqis and Iraqi security forces being able to take over responsibility inside of their cities. And they're seeing it as a progression in their capacities. And I think that's the important point. And we've seen that emphasized more and more over the last several days by all Iraqi leaders, both in the local press and in the international press. And I think that's the appropriate tone. And I believe I agree with that. And I think it is time for them to take responsibility inside of the cities.
He doesn't talk publicly about the American role of providing security. What does he say privately to you?
Well, we've had a partnership. We've built a hard partnership here over the last 2.5 and 3 years. Through the surge, through the dark days here in Iraq, when attacks were 10 times what they are today, when there were a significant amount of more civilian casualties, we worked very hard together to gain this improvement. There's been sacrifices by Iraqi security forces. There's been sacrifices by the coalition forces. They recognize this. We are continuing this partnership. But it's time for this partnership to have an Iraqi lead. It's time for this partnership to have the Iraqis out front. And it's time for us to support that.